How does one distinguish between the Boone legends, and the Boone facts? Or what are the main myths about Daniel Boone that obviously you're writing about and trying to give a correct image?
Yeah, typically the usual rule of thumb is that the more recent the perception or story about a historical character, the less accurate it is. It's like the game of telephone. Some people may remember the game of telephone that one person whispers in one person's ear, and there's like 10 people in line, and by the time that whatever that first person whispered gets to the 10th person, it's a significantly changed message. And that's what happens with iconic figures like a Daniel Boone, like a Davy Crockett, like, a number of these frontiersmen, Kit Carson, Jim Bridger, other historical figures. And so for researchers, the best case scenario is, are there contemporary accounts? And by contemporary, I mean these were accounts that were written down or at least recorded in some way at the time of a person's existence or soon after. And in the case of Daniel Boone, there's a ton of legends about him, and some of them turn out to be true. I mean, he had many adventures that are actually true. And the whole story about how his daughter got kidnapped with two of her companions, and he spent days tracking the Indians down and rescuing his daughter, which later became an important part of the book Last of the Mohegans by James Fenimore Cooper. But in Daniel Boone's case, during his lifetime, he became a well-known figure. And towards the end of his life, there were people that sought him out to interview him about his life and adventures. John Filson is just one of those people, and wrote down some of the stories and reminiscences of Boone. And most important is a man named Lyman Draper. Draper came along soon after Boone passed away. He never had the opportunity to actually sit down and interview Daniel Boone, but he spent years and years and years. And he once said he probably logged about 50,000 miles on horseback, tracking down people who knew Boone, including Boone family members, his children who were still alive, and nephews and nieces, in-laws. And he recorded hundreds and hundreds of pages of stories about Daniel Boone. And he never got to write the biography he wanted to write, which is rather sad. But he had all his papers, and which he donated to. He was the head of the Wisconsin Historical Society, and that they could, to this day, you can find all these pages about Boone in the Wisconsin Historical Society archives. And those are kind of contemporary accounts. There's the Filson Society in Louisville, Kentucky, which has its own repository. So these are the kind of contemporary sources which are the closest to what a Daniel Boone actually was and what actually did transpire during his lifetime. So you start going through that, and it makes it easier for you to remove from the narrative, other narratives of Boone, just what doesn't seem to be or is definitely not true.
So, examples of myth versus facts.
Well, one myth is that Daniel Boone sported a coonskin cap. We got that from the television show. He would never wear a coonskin cap. He rarely wore any cap in the woods because that could be an impediment. He used to put bear grease on his hair and to keep it in place and out of his way when he was hunting and hiking and however and guiding people through the Cumberland Gap. So that's one thing about him, that he was a big, tall man. This Paul Bunyan-like character. He was actually probably about 5'7", 5'8", kind of on the stocky side. That he was an Indian fighter was the biggest one. That he was this man on the frontier that was slaying Indians right and left and making it safe for new settlers. At the end of his life, that was one of his biggest regrets, that he had acquired that reputation as an Indian fighter, because he never endeavored to do that. I mean, yes, he was involved in fights with Indians because of he was in a couple of wars, the Revolutionary War, the French and Indian War, and sometimes just for self-defense on the frontier. But he never sought to have conflict with Indians. He never had this hatred for them, as I mentioned before. So there's one of these things that people thought were always a myth about Daniel Boone was that there's something called a story called Boone's Surprise, which is that when he was on one of his long hunts that lasted about 14 months and he got back and his wife Rebecca was there nursing a newborn baby girl. And he wasn't a terribly educated man, but he could do basic math. And he realized if I've been gone for 14 months, where'd this baby come from? And that had been long been considered a myth. But we found the paperwork, the accounts, the even by Boone's son, his daughter's brother, that his wife had thought he was dead and had looked for comfort in the arms of Ned Boone, Daniel's younger brother, which had produced a daughter who he became very close to and raised as his own daughter. In fact, when Boone died, it was at her home with her husband and kids. So that turned out to be true, not a myth. That's I think one of the things that makes writing about history so fascinating, that there are things that you don't think are true that can turn out to be true, and things that people maintain were true that, well, actually, no, they're not.